welcome everybody. I think we can get started now. Thanks for coming out on maybe the nicest day so far this year, but we won't keep you too long. So today's event, Challenging Inequality in Capitalism, Learning from Seattle's Fight for 15, is hosted by Socialist Alternative. We're a social and economic justice organization with 3 branches here in Minneapolis. Locally, we've got a 12-year history in the Twin Cities, organizing against budget cuts, home foreclosure, and other attacks on working people through racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and so on. Nationally, we're the fastest growing socialist organization in the country, with members in 34 states and nearly doubling our membership in the last 6 months. If you're familiar with Kshama Sawant, she ran as a Socialist Alternative candidate for City Council last year in Seattle and won, and went on to initiate 15 now. Our campaign here for City Council in Minneapolis last year, which developed a powerful grassroots campaign and came within just about 200 votes of winning, and of course Kshama's campaign. These are considered the most successful socialist election campaigns in decades. The Socialist Alternative also stands in solidarity with the Committee for Workers International, a worldwide socialist organization with affiliate organizations in over 40 countries across the world, on every continent, targeting the global capitalist system as the root cause of terrorism, war, poverty, discrimination, and environmental destruction. So that's to give you an idea of who we are. Today, we have an excellent discussion and somewhat wide-ranging discussion as well. Of course, the focus is on the imminent victory in Seattle and how that's developed, but we'll also seek to fit that into the wider struggle against inequality and capitalism. And to start that discussion, we have a panel here today. So first, we've got Ty Moore, who's an organizer with Socialist Alternative and recently our own candidate for City Council. JOSEFINA, an organizer with 15 Now and Socialist Alternative, who recently traveled to Seattle for the 15 Now National Conference. And GLEN Ford, an award-winning journalist and executive director of the Black Agenda Report. So each of them will speak, and then we'll have an open discussion. And just to warn everybody, the speakers are already aware, but we do have multiple recordings here. If you can tell, it's KFAI, and we're also live streaming the event, just so everybody's aware. So first, we'll have Ty speaking about how 15 is being won in Seattle. So let's welcome Ty.
See if I can arrange my computer without overly disrupting all the recording equipment. Does that look good? Okay. Whoa. Well, yeah, I think just looking at the folks who were able to make it today, it is a beautiful day. I think it'd be nice if we could be having this discussion in the park, but I think probably most people here are generally familiar with the story of Kshama Sawant's victory in Seattle, and have probably followed the developments in the fight for 15 in Seattle to some degree or other. But I think it's still helpful. What I want to do is kind of provide an update about what's likely to happen in the coming weeks, and then try and draw out what are some of the main lessons. So just, I think a year and a half ago, when the early wave of the small fast food strikes raised the slogan of $15 an hour for the first time, it was widely seen as a bold call for economic justice in the fast food industry. But I think virtually nobody, including ourselves, would have anticipated that just a year and a half later, the political establishment of a big city and big business in a major U.S. city would be forced to concede an across-the-board minimum wage increase of $15 an hour. Seattle City Council is on the cusp of doing just that, with a minimum wage bill that will raise about 100,000 Seattle workers, the lowest paid Seattle workers, to the highest minimum wage in the country. Alongside the initial impetus that the fast food strikes gave to this campaign, I think a real honest assessment, and I'll get into this further, should give credit to this victory to the grassroots campaign led up by Kshama Sawant, Socialist Alternative, and 15 Now. However, once forced into accepting 15, the city establishment is now attempting to isolate Sawant, isolate socialists, and water down the proposal and claim credit for their approach of behind-the-scenes negotiation, class compromise, etc. And as I said, I'll get further into that. On May 1st, the mayor of Seattle, Mayor Murray, announced the plan that he and his committee had come up with and is pushing the council to negotiate. The New York Times on May 1st said, quote, Mayor Ed Murray presented on Thursday what he described as an imperfect but workable plan to increase the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour, more than twice the federal minimum wage and one of the highest anywhere in the nation, through a series of complex and phased-in stages. Just as crucially, he said, the plan has broad political support with a coalition of labor and business groups ready to push hard to get the council to support it. And since that's been written, 8 of the 9 city councilors, you can guess which one is left out there, have agreed to be co-signers on this bill as it is introduced into the council. The details of the proposal in some ways are quite complicated, and I think that's intentionally so, making it hard for average working people who are not political scientists, who aren't going to read the hundreds of pages of fine print, to fully comprehend what is going on. They're saying it's a 3 to 4 year phase-in for big business, and for small businesses it's a 7 to 8 year phase-in. Behind that, we have to look at what's a few different things to recognize how far they've pushed it from our demand. We were demanding, by the way, Kshama Sawant, Socialist Alternative 15 now, an immediate 15 for big business, adjusted for inflation from there, and that small businesses would get and nonprofits would get a 3-year phase-in. And we were quite liberal, actually, in our definition of small business. We weren't in full agreement even in our own organization, but we said small businesses will count as 250 employees or less. Now that included, in fact, some pretty wealthy individuals who absolutely could afford, but we felt because of the political conditions and the confusion, the attempt of big business to put small business in the front, we felt that was politically necessary compromise to win the broadest possible support. But what the mayor is proposing is that big business, which he defines as over 500 employees, which is actually, I think the number is 93% or 97% of all businesses, and comprising 2/3 of all workers. Big business, 2/3 of all workers are below that number. Big business will get a 3-year phase-in if they don't offer benefits, and a 4-year phase-in if they do. Now, what are benefits? It includes things like Starbucks offers health benefits. The vast majority of Starbucks workers don't take those benefits because they have to pay too much and get too little in return, especially with Obamacare. But they get a 4-year phase-in. Small businesses, again, those defined as under 500, which is the 2/3 of all Seattle workers, will get a 7 to 8 year phase-in. But really, because of inflation and rising cost of living, the reality is a majority of the workers will not get a real 15 in today's dollars for another 10 years down the road. So that's a significant concession from what we initially, a significant watering down of the proposal. The New York Times, the same New York Times article that summarized the mayor's plan, also in its second paragraph, indicating the strength of our campaign, said, but the plan, which in many other cities might be seen as a liberal democratic agenda at the frontier of social and economic engineering, was immediately attacked, not from the mayor's right, but from the left. Kshama Sawant, the Socialist Alternative Party member who the New York Times says was elected to the Seattle City Council last year on a single-minded drive to raise wages, said the plan has been watered down by business and interests and the mayor's 24-member committee, Income on Inequality Committee, which she was a member. In a packed news conference at City Hall immediately after Murray's press conference, she called on her supporters to continue their effort to gather signatures for a possible ballot initiative on the wages this fall. The campaign is also to put pressure on the council to make the mayor's plan better for workers, she suggested. Quote, Kshama said, every year of a phase-in means yet another year in poverty for workers. Our work is far from done. In fact, it's not just Sawant and the far left who are criticizing the mayor's proposal, but in a recent poll conducted by labor leaders who are backing the mayor's plan, it was revealed that a majority of likely voters in Seattle, so that's even likely voters are not a majority of all workers. A majority of likely voters don't support any phase-in for big business. So in practice, and this has been the whole strength of our campaign, we've managed to win over the public on a number of key issues, whether it be tip credit, total compensation, or many of the other things big business is trying to push through. And we're continuing to rest on popular majority, whereas the majority of council is looking to stick to the mayor's so-called compromise proposal. But still, I think, despite all this watered down, this is still a major and historic victory. 1/3 of Seattle residents earn less than $15 an hour. A University of Washington study commissioned by the council itself said that the increase will benefit 100,000 people working in the city and reduce poverty in Seattle by over 25%. The pay of full-time workers on today's minimum wage will increase by about $11,000 a year. So it's actually, one of the most significant minimum wage victories in modern U.S. history, despite how far it's been watered down from what we were demanding. And it's going to have an impact resonating nationally. Already, San Francisco looks like it may introduce a ballot initiative for 15. In New York State, a number of legislatures have introduced a statewide minimum wage for 15 for big businesses, and it's being discussed and taken up by activists, union activists, community activists across the country. The big question, though, as I alluded to earlier, is whose victory is this? The mayor, the corporate media, the more conservative labor leaders? I'm going to criticize the labor leaders a lot during my talk, but I want to emphasize now, we do have a substantial amount of support for our proposal in Sawant. The machinists at Boeing have endorsed our proposal for 15 now. We have the teachers, AFSCME local, a whole host of different locals, most of them smaller, more radical locals, are endorsing and working behind our proposal. But the most influential labor leaders, in particular, David Rolfe of SEIU 775 is the most politically influential, and the head of the Labor Council have tended to side with the mayor. And they're painting a story that this is the result of the mayor's committee, co-chaired by the head of the Chamber of Commerce and David Rolfe, president of SEIU 775. And both these figures energetically backed and financed the mayor's election campaign last fall. And when the mayor made his announcement on May 1st of this compromise plan, David Rolfe and labor and business leaders were flanking him on side by side, showing the unity between labor and business. To quote the New York Times editorial that was published a little bit before, criticizing that sort of provided justification for this class compromise approach. The mayor and the labor leaders repeatedly warned, we don't want class warfare out there. And the editorial said, I'll read it. The editorial said, 15 now, that's the slogan of a group of far-left activists who are pushing Seattle to force a 61% wage increase. If they rushed into it, as the zealots favor, that's us, they would hurt the burgeoning raise the minimum wage movement around the country and deprive the Democrats of a great voter stimulant for the midterm elections. And this is consistent with what their approach is. Of course, we answered that big business has been relentlessly pursuing a policy of class warfare for decades, which is why union density is at historic lows and why social inequality is at historic highs. The reality is the main difference in Seattle is that now workers are beginning to fight back and have an influence and have a representative in the political system. In reality, the policy of the labor leaders, of many of them, were determined less by a desire to see the maximum possible gains for working people, but more by a desire to maintain their alliance with the Democratic parties and to insulate themselves from pressure from below that our campaign is helping to stimulate inside their own organizations in many cases. The London-based Guardian newspaper, sort of the New York Times of England, who sent a reporter to Seattle to follow the events, had a far more accurate account, and it's worth quoting in some depth, sort of their May 5th article summarizing what has happened here. Quote, Sawant can claim a good share of the credit for forcing the agenda. Seattle fast food workers got the movement off the ground early last year, joining in nationwide strikes and protests that began in New York. But the Socialist Alternative candidate helped put 15 demand at the fore of Seattle politics by making it the centerpiece of an election campaign she began as a rank outsider against the Democratic Party incumbent. Sawant won the election in November with more than 93,000 votes, socialist views, strong denunciations of capitalism, and the occasional quoting of Karl Marx, which evidently is no longer an immediate bar to election in the U.S. Continuing the quote, the mayor, Ed Murray, also threw his support behind the 15 campaign, but only in the last weeks of the election campaign, in part under pressure from one of the state's largest trade unions, SEIU, and as opinion polls showed that more than 2/3 of Seattle residents were backing the move. Once on the council, Sawant used her position to keep the pressure up. She said, quote, my election had a decisive impact. Because we have a socialist on the city council, we get a massively magnified microphone for our cause. Sawant's campaign has resonated far beyond the city, giving her a degree of national recognition few city councilors ever enjoy. I think, it's interesting how the capitalist media in their own country, the New York Times, they're very bent on preserving the status quo, but oftentimes you can find more honest accounts, even from pro-capitalists. The Guardian will defend the Labor Party just like the New York Times will defend the Democratic Party when it comes to their country, but are prepared to make a much more honest accounting of things when reporting here. So why is Seattle the only major city in the country to win 15? I think it's because it's the only major city with a fighting socialist council member. Seattle has been deeply politicized over the last year. It's stunning when you really think about it. There was the same poll that was released last week said 83% of those polled said they were paying attention to the 15 debate. Now just think, what issue in front of Minneapolis City Council can you say 83% of the population are paying serious attention to? There's virtually nothing. It shows that this issue has been completely dominant. 78% of the support the call for 15, up from 68% in January, and a year ago, I think this would have undoubtedly been less than 50% who thought it was a serious proposal. Big business has decisively lost the debate, but they were forced to accept 15 in words. But they have spent the last months attempting to water down, through pressure on the mayor, city council, and labor leaders, 15 in reality. The same Guardian article gives a flavor of the mood in Seattle, describing a scene during one of their interviews with Kshama Sawant. It said, quote, "The effect can be seen in the city's as the city's best-known councilor orders coffee at Starbucks, one of the hugely profitable global corporations headquartered in Seattle, and a target for her scorn for its low wages. 3 young women working behind the counter recognize Sawant, who was raised in India and retains her Mumbai accent, from repeated appearances on local TV news. They profess their support to her. Other customers approach her and praise her policies." And that's what we see. When I went to Seattle for the conference a few weeks ago, I got off the airplane, got on the public transit, was starting to ask directions. Very quickly, I had 4 people around discussing the 15 issue, all of them with their opinions, interested that I was going to a conference, etc. It's even somebody said, "Hey, are you a member of Socialist Alternative?" They'd shown up to a meeting there, etc., where our organization has grown dramatically. It's an extremely politicized environment. But why is this happening in Seattle? Is it unique? Is it in the water? Is it part of their Birkenstocks and socks culture, as some of the media have said? I think in reality, the understanding of this is absolutely possible in other cities, and it has to do far less with anything unique about Seattle, and far more to do what's unique about socialist politics and approaches to class struggle. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try and summarize what I think are the 2 main lessons that we can draw out and apply to our local campaign here and across the country. First, the need for complete political independence from the Democratic Party and big business. And those slides, of course, counter the main defenders of the Democratic Party on the left will say, well, we might agree with you on a whole bunch of stuff, but you're not effective if you just remain purist about your ideas and all those other accusations. To be effective, to get things done, you need to work, be prepared to work inside the system, by which they mean inside the Democratic Party. But the whole nature of the Democratic Party in Seattle, as in most cities where they have a monopoly in power, is that they run things in the interests of big business. Now they do reside on a contradiction. Well, fundamentally working to carry out, I would argue, the interests of big business, they also must appeal to working people, oppressed people for votes. But this puts them in an impossible contradiction, where in words they support 15 and other progressive issues, but in practice, behind the scenes, they're working to water it down as much as they believe they can get away with. But it also puts labor leaders and progressives who support the Democrats in the same impossible contradiction. While professing their support for 15, in reality in Seattle, at every stage, they made extremely limited mobilizations. In practice, they stopped short of anything that would compromise the relationship, particularly with the Mayor Murray, who they put so much money into getting elected, or the Democratic Party. And it was linked, in fact, SEIU in particular, who, we have a very good relationship with many of the SEIU activists, et cetera, so this is not some blanket, but the international leadership of SEIU leaned on Seattle, just as they lean on many of their locals, to say, look, if you, make a big class struggle example out of Seattle, that will make it complicated for us to maintain our relationships and negotiate things across the country. And so it's also not just a relation with the local Democratic Party leaders, but their national strategy, which is completely hinged on getting a seat at the table with the Obama administration and the rest of the Democratic Party. And that meant they limited the mobilization. In practice, their entire approach was toward behind-the-scenes negotiations in the mayor's committee with business to try and come out with a initial proposal. This meant that none of the main union leaders backed Kshama Sawant's election campaign, and none of them were seriously fighting for a $15 an hour minimum wage until after she was elected, and it was clear we were going to push in that direction. While initially endorsing 15 Now, SEIU and the other most powerful unions refused to join when it came to publicly putting forward an independent labor position. Inside the negotiations, which were supposed to be kept quiet, of course, there was a labor caucus, we were part of it. They put forward their position, which we generally would have agreed with. It wasn't everything we wanted either, but we had a united position in the negotiations. But they completely refused to go public with that position. We did, anyway. We said at a certain stage, we're going to use the ballot initiative as a check. If the city council and the mayor doesn't pass it, something good enough, we have to be prepared to go to the ballot. And that meant we had to file paperwork and come out with a position, and we put that position forward. We delayed weeks, in fact, trying to pull more sections of labor, saying we want a united front with labor, we'll compromise on this, we'll compromise on that. We want a united front to have the strongest possible labor position that was independent of big business, to have a united public campaign to win popular support. Because our argument was, we're not powerful in the negotiating room unless we have a big movement on the streets behind us. So our approach was to build neighborhood coalitions, neighborhood assemblies, neighborhood organizations, to build big demonstrations in the streets. Every time the city council or the mayor's committee had a hearing, we would pack it, organize for as many supporters, and we would try and use the whole politicization to educate people, not just on 15, but on the issues of the tip credit, total compensation, answering the lies of big business about how this would economic disaster, et cetera. But we were mostly alone in that public campaign. In practice, the weight and the strength and the finances of the big labor unions never really fully mobilized to counter big business. We think much more could have been won in Seattle. I mean, this is a huge victory. I don't want to in any ways undermine it. I think it will have a major impact on the national consciousness, raising workers' expectations everywhere, spurring the fight for 15 on across the country. Just a few days ago, we saw the biggest fast food strike yet in 150 cities across the country on May 15th. And notably, the 15 slogan, which was not always that prominent on all the fast food strikes, was more prominent across the country on the fast food strikes this time than any of their previous strikes. So it indicates the sort of welling up of support for this idea and the growing credibility of this idea from below. And the victory in Seattle will certainly do that. But I think the other lesson is we could have won more. If we had been able to win broader support for socialist ideas, for class struggle methods of support in the wide sections of the labor movement, the other progressive organizations, we absolutely could have won more. We'd won the battle for public opinion, but it's still a question of getting, votes on the council. And I think what will pass is a reflection of the strength of the movement as it stands, and I think it will, our position in Seattle will continue to grow. Our ability to win continuing victories on the basis of this one will develop. One exciting news, on Friday, we announced a second election campaign. We're going to run Jess Spear, who is the director of the 15 Now struggle in Seattle, for State House against the Speaker of the Washington State House, arguably the most powerful Democrat in Washington State, the holder of the purse strings. We're running her in Seattle in the district where Kshama had the greatest level of support. And we think there's a serious chance that we could unseat one of the most powerful politicians in Washington State and send an even more decisive message that people are fed up with the two-party corporate corruption and are ready for a radical political alternative in this country. Thank you.
Ty, so next, let's welcome JOSEFINA, who's going to speak about the importance of the fight for 15 in the wider struggle against capitalism.
Can anybody see me?
that work? Okay. I know use this here.
Para una plena recuperación de ingresos de la clase trabajadora se requerirá la participación de los trabajadores. Es así.
So workers need to play a leading role in any plan to regain the lost income of working people in this country or around the world.
Este jueves estuvimos en huelga miles de trabajadores que han sido explotados laboriosamente de grandes cadenas mundiales de restaurantes de comida rápida como McDonald's, Burger King, Subway y Wendy's. En más de 150 ciudades de Estados Unidos y otros países.
During the fast food workers strike last Thursday, thousands of the most exploited workers who work for multinational corporations like McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, and Wendy's went out on strike in over 150 cities on 6 continents.
Los trabajadores demandan aumento de salario para sobrevivir los gastos de vida en la industria de los establecimientos de comida rápida. Y estoy diciendo sobrevivir solamente.
So these workers were demanding a living wage from these fast food corporations, and yeah, I want to emphasize that, this is a wage that's necessary to survive or to live on.
Okay. Necesitamos organizarnos como socialistas alternativos en los Estados Unidos y otros países.
And with these strikes, we need organizations like Socialist Alternative in the United States and in other countries as well.
Muchos trabajadores de comida ganan el salario mínimo nacional de $7.25 la hora.
So there's millions of workers that are in the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour.
La exigencia de los trabajadores de la industria de comida rápida por un incremento salarial en Estados Unidos en el 2012 y desde entonces ha ido extendiendo a otros países.
So in 2012, these fast food workers started demanding an increase in the minimum wage, the $15 demand, and now it's important because this movement's expanding to other countries, which is a huge development.
Estos movimientos son necesarios y urgentes porque vivimos en una sociedad con muchas desigualdades económicas. Aumentar el salario mínimo pondrá dinero en los bolsillos de los trabajadores y eso nos beneficiaría a todos.
These movements are urgently needed because we live in a society with extreme inequalities, and raising the minimum wage would put money directly back into the pockets of millions of workers, benefiting everyone in the process.
La gente, todo el país pensaba que, toda la gente pensaba que estábamos locos porque pedíamos el salario, el aumento del salarial a $15, pero ahora Seattle tiene grandes posibilidades de una victoria.
So a lot of people, when they hear about the $15 demand, they think we're a little crazy, right? Because that's so much more than what it is now. But now, I think we have far greater possibilities is what's going on with these strikes and also the work in Seattle, that it's more real for people to hear this demand.
Pero chequen esto, McDonald's dijo que 80% de sus restaurantes es de propiedad, operación independiente, propietarios de pequeñas empresas. En mi opinión, es mentira. Cuando son un negocio global que pagan a su patrón millones de dólares.
So yeah, and it's check this out. Like even McDonald's is saying that they're a small business because they're a franchise and they're independently operated. And for me, that's obviously a lie, because how can a small business pay its CEO millions of dollars, an hour, or thousands of dollars an hour? Sorry.
Así que para aquellos que quieren ver el cambio de sistema, sin duda la oposición al capitalismo ha venido creciendo el interés y la demanda de una alternativa política real.
So when people hear this, for a lot of people, they want to change the system. And if you look around, I think you can see that there's growing opposition to capitalism and growing interest in the demand for a real political alternative, that more people are sort of open to these ideas.
El deseo general por la igualdad de riqueza, un espíritu de solidaridad social.
And to fulfill the many different needs of people, we need to develop a spirit of social solidarity, work together to overcome the system.
Estas corporaciones tan solo...
Oh, sorry, guys, the computer did something crazy. Here we go.
Oh, I'm lost.
It's okay, we'll fix it. Sorry, the Google Documents does some crazy.
Oh, ¿dónde está?
Sí, aquí.
Estas corporaciones tan solo tienen avaricia. Entre más tienen, más quieren, a costa de los brazos de los trabajadores.
So these corporations, they're so greedy. The more they have, the more they want. But of course, they rely on the work of the workers in order to gain that money.
El reto histórico es transformar la sociedad después de todos los trabajadores. Somos los más que hacemos todo el trabajo, tenemos el poder ahora.
So the historic challenge is to transform society. After all, we're the workers, we do all the work, and of course we have the power to do that.
Trabajamos por la causa, no para el bienestar propio.
And obviously we work for each other, not for our own benefit, or we work for the benefit of all of us, not for the benefit of one of us.
Que nos está interrumpiendo es un pequeño porcentaje de grupos de riquillos que tienen el control de la economía que claramente nos afecta.
But what prevents us is a very small group of super rich people who have total control over the economy.
Científicos del país de Suiza hizo un estudio en el 2011 y encontró que 167 corporaciones controlan más el 40% de la economía mundialmente.
So, for example, there was a group of scientists in Switzerland, and they did a study in 2011. They found that 167 corporations control 40% of the global economy.
Ellos tienen el poder y afectan la destrucción del medio ambiente, la pobreza, las guerras, el sexismo y racismo. Y por eso los socialistas pensamos que es necesario que tenemos el poder nosotros.
So, this small group has all the power, and they preside over the destruction of the environment, over mass poverty, wars. They preside over the continuance of sexism and racism in our society. And because of this, socialists think that it's necessary that we, the workers, take power for ourselves. And yeah.
Unidos tenemos el poder para ser líderes de la economía democráticamente, para beneficiar todos en nuestra sociedad, a nuestro planeta.
So if we had the power, if we were the leaders of the global economy, we'd be able to run the economy democratically for the benefit of everyone in society and for the benefit of the planet.
Eso es lo que la palabra socialismo significa para mí.
And for me, this is what the struggle of socialism means. This is what we're fighting for.
¿Y para ustedes qué significa?
And for you all as well.
all of this fits into the wider context of corporate control politics.
Power to the people. Power to the movement for $15 an hour.
Yeah.
Say it. Power to the movement for $15 an hour. We always need to put the emphasis on movement, because unless people are put in motion, you don't get $15 an hour. You don't get anything, and you don't even get to keep what you've already got. That's because we're now in a deep era of capitalists busily taking back those things that were won many years ago in terms of wages, of benefits, and job security. Previous assumptions about the definition of employment, what it means to have a job, are no longer operative. People serve as temporary workers with ill-defined terms of employment and no job security whatsoever, and they do that year after year after year. Some business operations are almost wholly staffed by temporary workers. Temporary workers are sometimes overseen by temporary managers, and this is not a temporary situation, because it's apparently the new normal under capitalism, not just here, but everywhere, because it's a manifestation of global capitalism. It is their business plan for the whole planet. The workers cleaning up the nuclear disaster in Japan are largely temporary workers, and in that might mean temporary in every sense of the word, temporarily living workers. Pensions that were supposed to be forever and guaranteed now turn out to be temporary or non-existent pensions. In Detroit, the right to vote turns out to be temporary, to be turned on and off by the appointment of an emergency financial dictator. The majority of the black population of Michigan is now effectively disenfranchised. It's starting to feel like President Lincoln's emancipation was only a temporary proclamation. In this kind of environment, the accomplishments so far of 15 Now and Socialist Alternative in Seattle are all the more extraordinary. At a time when the capitalists are clawing back generations of gains made by labor in the United States, and when so many unions are more than eager to give back those gains, Socialist International, Socialist Alternative, which is Socialism Internationally, Socialist Alternative is pointing a way to claw back things for labor. You have put $15 an hour on the political map. You showed that a righteous demand will resonate in the minds and bodies of people, even when all the organs of capitalist media proclaim that the future holds nothing but more austerity and more retrenchment. You have broadened working people's perceptions of their possibilities, and in so doing, you also put limits on the range of retrenchment options that are available to the capitalists. And that's what really upsets big business. It's not about the money. They can afford it, and they can pass the costs on. It is the imposition of speed limits in their race to the bottom that bothers them. This goes counter to their business plan for the planet. For the capitalists, the word freedom means freedom from limitations on the way capitalists spend their money. A $15 an hour minimum wage is not a socialist demand. But when it comes from an actual socialist in concert with a broad range of other political tendencies and with the support of millions of people, then that is a bad day for the capitalists all over the country. Socialist Alternative is giving the rulers bad days and sleepless sleepless nights, and that is a wonderful thing. When the bosses suffer a setback, it makes their media saying silly things or sillier than usual things. A few of them now are even saying that $15 an hour may be an idea whose time has come. The fact is that $15 an hour would be the national standard if the 1960s minimum wage had kept up with inflation. And so by that measure, we are way behind the clock. The mayor and the city council in Seattle are trying to set that clock back further, back maybe 3 years or 4 years or 7 or 8 years in terms of $15 an hour. So none of us should be confused about what time it really is. Workers are in crisis because capitalism is in a state of profound, insoluble crisis. The finance capitalist class, which creates nothing but commodifies everything, lives at a perpetual edge of disaster. Its crises are ever more frequent and they are ever deeper. It seeks to stabilize itself by relentlessly destabilizing the planet, attempting to churn out profits from catastrophe. At this stage of capitalist decline, there is no reforming the system into stability. It cannot happen at this stage. They are in a race to the bottom. We are in a race to save the world from the effects of their collapse. Maybe literally to save the world in a physical sense. But you start by saving workers' mortgages, and by saving their rent money, by fighting for the amelioration of their conditions, and against the capitalists' push to the bottom. You fight against growing economic inequality, knowing that inequality is built into the system. You fight so that working people remember that they have the capacity to fight and to win sometimes, because only the masses of working people can save themselves from the disastrous effects of capitalism in collapse. Challenging inequality is not socialist inherently. Liberals do it. Our thoroughly corporatist president pays lip service to it. Republicans say that they're against it, and they say that more deregulated capitalism will lessen inequality. Thomas Piketty, who's from what passes for left in France, spends 670 pages proving that growing inequality is the normal state of capitalism and lessening of inequalities is an historical aberration. And then he goes on to say that all we need to do is increase taxes on the rich after 670 pages. A real socialist creates the conditions in which people learn that the cure for inequality, the cure for what ails them in their worsening lives, is the overthrow of the capitalist class. They learn that we had better do this very quickly before these bastards bring the whole world down with them. The $15 an hour struggle in Seattle and beyond Seattle is not in itself socialist, but it can be if socialists make it so by building a movement to bring down the entire edifice of a system whose time has gone. Talented people.
Everybody. Now I'm going to have Chris come up and give a quick financial appeal, and then we'll move to the discussion.
So I have 3 unfortunate jobs today. The first is trying to take JOSEFINA's energy and elegance and impart it or whatever. The second is following GLEN FORD. And the third is I have to ask you guys for money. And so that's like a kind of lining up to be a bad day for me. But we'll make it a good, so you guys can make it a good day if this goes well. Yeah, my name's Chris. I'm an organizer with Socialist Alternative. I still do and used to do a lot of work with Occupy Homes, doing some anti-foreclosure stuff in South Minneapolis. And more recently, I've been doing 15 Now work and also trying to get some branches of Socialist Alternative off the ground in other places. And I think just to give an idea of how exciting this is, there's a lot of folks who are really want to join the socialist movement right now, and they want to join because they see what we're doing and what other folks are doing as effective. Like, this is an effective, logical thing to do right now. I want to challenge this inequity. I should get involved and build this movement. I'm going to give someone a call at 5 o'clock, and she's this woman who just graduated college in Wisconsin. And she joined on the internet. She saw some video of Kshama or something, signed up online, is going to pay dues. And then she's going back to Milwaukee. She's the only member there. She doesn't even know really what this is. She just knows she wants to be a part of it. She's going to go home and build all summer. That's like her thing, right? All alone. That's like the type of heroism we need right now in a lot of ways, is folks are excited to do that. But as for Socialist Alternative, we have debt, and in order to take advantage of those opportunities and to really give the folks the tools they need, we have to send her materials. Potentially we could get some people out and help her organize. All that takes money, right? It's not like we can just dream it into existence. And the opportunities, I think, to build the socialist movement are bigger now than they ever have been. But there's the saying, the rent doesn't wait. Like, we got to pay for this room today. Glen's flying home. That ticket wasn't free. Because unfortunately, no matter how strong we are right now, we still live in this society where the rent doesn't wait. So I was going to ask, make a financial appeal based on that. But really, we need the help right now. We can do this summer. We can build quickly, but it's not going to happen automatically. We were asking. One suggested donation was $15 today. The number didn't come out of the sky, and it's a good number. So that was one thing. We're going to pass around some buckets, and if folks can do that, that'd be an awesome baseline. But I want to challenge people just a little more before I have to stop talking and we open up the discussion. Maybe you could give $15 plus $5 for every vacant home on your block right now. I'll give you a hint. That's 3 to 4 in Minneapolis, in some neighborhoods as well. So you can do the math there. That'll be maybe 15 plus 15. You could give an extra $5 for every $10,000 of student debt that your average college student walks away from right now. That means you got to add another 15 if you can do that. But that would be what it would be for $5 for every $10,000 of student debt. That's the average. Some have more, some have less. You could give an extra $1 for every foot sea levels are going to rise in the next 100 years. It's a nice round number according to the latest study. That's $10, right? That'd be $1 per foot. And a global catastrophe, which we want to prevent and we need to prevent. I like the Or maybe you could give 15 plus $1 for every person you know who's been wrongfully pulled over or abused because of the color of their skin. I can give you a hint there that that's probably most folks that you know in your circle who are people of color, right? Probably in this world. We can give extra. We need to give more to make this happen. I think I like the urgency that Glenn was talking about. That we're in a race against time here. It's not like this is going to happen overnight, and we have a unique opportunity to really get this off the ground. So folks can really dig deep and maybe dig a little deeper for some of the realities that we all know we face every day. It really goes a long way to getting folks organized and getting things moving as fast as we can. So thanks.
Thanks, everybody. So for our discussion today, I'm going to use a stack. If you'd like to come into the discussion, whether you have a question, a brief comment, or you do want to make a more extensive point, just raise your hand. Even if somebody else is talking, I'll note you down. Just like that, I'll note you down for sure. And I'll come to you in the order, try to get to everybody, and try to go to people in the order I see them. And to make this as democratic as possible, to hear from as many voices as we can, I'll prioritize those who haven't spoken yet. And I do ask that everybody keeps their contributions to just a couple minutes. So if I do ask you to wrap up, please respect the goals of this meeting. Do so as quickly as possible. We'll save a few minutes at the end for our speakers to answer any remaining questions, make closing comments. But we don't want to put all that pressure onto our speakers who already just had to speak for a while. Hopefully all of us can take some time to grapple with the questions and tackle the questions that have been thrown out into the room. So starting now, raise your hand if you want to come into the discussion. Would you like to start?
Yeah. Okay. I heard somewhere, and I'm not sure from what source, but I heard that if the minimum wage had kept up with inflation, it would be nearly $22 an hour. And I'd like to know how the hell far do you think that idea is over with anyone? Well, with the lower, the working class, it would go over well, but.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I studied the issue of where the minimum wage should be if it kept up with inflation since the 60s, and I think I came up with something like $10 an hour back in 1994 or something like that. So probably up to 15 by now. You know, one thing about raising the minimum wage, it also helps to reduce inequality. Prevailing wages among whites are much higher than prevailing wages for African Americans, for example, which explains a lot of the poverty that goes on. And if we were to do, you know, try to go to court to defend a living wage ordinance in Minneapolis, you know, that's one of the, you know, arguments we could raise, that this would be consistent with the goals of the prevailing wage and minimum wage laws in Minnesota, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I made minimum wage back in 1966 when I started working. It was $1.60 an hour. And yeah, I think by inflation, you know, 6-7 times, it's somewhat more than $10 an hour, but that doesn't include the productivity, which has more than doubled since then. So a lot of times people say, you know, that $10.50 an hour minimum wage, that's just based on inflation. But the reality is we're doing twice as much work in an hour. And that's partly because we're working harder, and partly because the working class has produced the tools and the methods and the organization to work better. So if you're getting paid, you know, for the amount of work you're doing, and so I'm you know, sometimes told that, well, I don't know, I mean, the economy can't handle that. We can't do that, or that would cause terrible problems. Well, you know, I mean, back in 1966, the economy wasn't exactly falling apart, and they were paying people that. So that, I mean, there's two possibilities here. One is that, yes, the economy can handle that $22 an hour, and it can handle it rather quickly transitioning to that. Or it may be that the capitalist economy is in a more desperate shape, that it doesn't have as many resources to strip from the rest of the country and is looking, from the rest of the world, and is looking inward. I mean, we're still strip mining everything we can throughout the world through imperialism and conquest. But, you know, the Soviet Union fell, and the huge windfall that came to the capitalists from that is now over, and, you know, now they're working on the Ukraine. So the question is, I mean, I think capitalism, in some ways, these struggles really do attack the foundation of capitalism, in the sense that capitalism doesn't have the capability of, you know, surviving without turning inward in this country and basically doing that. I mean, the assets of the middle class, I think, you know, have dropped by about 1/3, for instance, over the last 5 years or so. So, yeah, it's a real important struggle.
As myself, and then nobody else on staff can raise your hand. Actually, why don't you go first?
So I'm wondering, it would seem to me that if people had money, they could go out and spend it. And if you, and there's the old Henry Ford thing about paying his workers enough so they could buy his own cars. And so why isn't the capitalist class thinking that if they had more demand for more people, that they would sell more of their things and they'd make more money, et cetera, et cetera? So I'd like to have that explained.
Yeah, I don't have someone to answer to that. I do think that the reality is that for working people, we're poorer than ever, but the capitalists are doing fine. There's record profits still coming in, and I think there's a certain measurement of how low can we pay and still maintain that. And I think right now that's what's happening, and that's partially what's plummeting the economy into crisis as well. I think the biggest lesson for me, I spent the last 3 months in Seattle, and the biggest lesson for me was the importance of confidence for working people. And I think that that is the biggest victory in Seattle. 15 is incredible. And having something, I think that what's going to pass the city council in Seattle is a victory for 15 now and working people in the movement. It's a victory of the movement. It's not the mayor giving this to us. The city council isn't doing this for us. It is happening because of the movement. Absolutely, they would not be doing it otherwise. And I think that that victory is, like the other said, showing people that we can do it at all. Because, I mean, as socialists, we make a lot of demands that people don't see as immediately viable, even if it would benefit them. But the transformation that can happen when you see that you can force the establishment to give you what you deserve and to give you a raise and to all of these things, when you see that, that transforms the way you do work. And I think that that has transformed a lot of the political lay of the land in Seattle. And I think that it's a small start. It's definitely not like it could be better. And I think it could be a bigger victory. We wanted more. We wanted a full immediate 15 now. But the biggest victory is raising the confidence of the people in Seattle and across the world, definitely across the U.S. I think that the fast food strikes that took place that Josefina was talking about, I think they were energized by Seattle, absolutely. The Minneapolis action that we did, it was kind of small, but there were people who were bringing it up to us before we even brought it up to them. Well, they got it in Seattle, and that's what working people are seeing all across the country and across the world. They won 15 in Seattle, and we should talk about, their difficult loopholes. It's watered down. It's not what we wanted, but it's a huge victory for the movement.
Can I attempt to address the
Yeah.
And this is only a partial answer, but Henry Ford, whose idea was to price his cars, to pay his workers wages so that they could buy the cars that they produced. Henry Ford was intent on making those cars in Michigan and selling those cars in Michigan. So he was developing a market for low-priced private automobiles in the United States, with the customers being in the United States. We're talking about global capitalism now, where not only are the workers not necessarily in the United States, but the end buyer is not necessarily in the United States, or there are enough folks in the class that can afford these things, a class that is doing well and is not that small. We're not talking about the 0.1%, but tens of millions of people who are flush with money, the upper echelons. And as long as they have lots of money to buy certain goods, it really doesn't matter how broke your ass is, you see, in terms of that manufacturer. And the other thing is that we now have a hegemony of finance capitalists. And finance capitalists don't care about a lot of things that manufacturers of Model Ts cared about. And they are, of course, global as well.
When they were having the drive to have unionization and a raise for the home health care, there was a letter to the editor that, in reading it the first time, I thought, this poor employer, this is going to be really hard, and he really cares about his clients and the clients that they work, that they can afford to have home health care. And I felt my heart was just wrung dry until he said at the end they had 300 employees. And so he's a major employer. But when we're talking about the capitalist class, when I think about the capitalist class, I think that the top 400 people have the same wealth as the bottom 50%. And that was on NPR, I think it was today or yesterday. But when you talk about this guy who had a letter to the editor saying he's hiring 300 people and giving 300 home health care, and maybe even that would mean like 1,500 old people or people needing home health care were able to live independently. I think we have to talk about, not use those words capitalist class, you have to talk about facts. How much it takes the home health care worker to get around from job to job, because some of them have 8 clients a day. What does that mean, and who pays their tax? So that you look and tailor who it is you're talking to. And in this room, capitalist class probably has a pretty similar idea. But you don't include people who I would say are capitalists if you use the capitalist class, because they're thinking those top 400 people. They're not thinking that I hire 300 people and I'm making a good living. Thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Glenn, you know, it is an absolute honor to have you here right now, and it was an honor to meet you yesterday. I guess this is kind of like my mantra and one of my main focuses. I explain what I'm saying here in just a minute. I'm amazed at the amount of left-wing groups that are in the room right now. Just like when we go to other events, there's other left-wing groups that are only hanging out with themselves and their own little particular sects. And this is a very, very good campaign, by the way. This 15-hour campaign. And I've been speaking, by the way, as an Irish Republican, which is the perspective, the political perspective that I come from. And one of my heroes is a guy called James Connolly. And James Connolly was a rabid anti-sectarianist. He fucking hated sectarianism. Just seeing the way it kept the left divided up. And I'll put this out actually to the whole panel, but specifically to you, Glenn. How can we get past this tiny sectarian sects fighting tiny sectarian sects, sectarian bullshit that has become the American left?
I want to address the left. And I think well together. That is shit. And I think well together. Groups interacted and could stand each other's company because Black America is a left political culture, decidedly to the left of White America. And so being left is not a cause for social ostracism in the community itself. And therefore you don't get those kinds of tensions that often come from isolation. All of this change, and this does not directly answer what you were saying, but I have to inject this in order to describe the reality as we see it. All of this changed with the election of President Obama, which sent the community into a psychological state never before seen. I hope never seen again. And what occurred at that point was people who called themselves communists, people who had always called themselves revolutionaries, brothers and sisters who called each other comrades. All of a sudden, 90% of them are backing Obama, repudiating their own lives. And the left, in any meaningful sense, disappears in Black America. I think in ways that you did not witness on the white side of town. This was profound. And so it's difficult for me to address your generalized question, having experienced this particular situation in Black America, in which the left goes poof, and then you have to question, was it really there before? You see. And then the question becomes, for those of us who never went poof, do we trust, associate with those folks who repudiated themselves as well as the Black radical tradition as soon as there was an opportunity to cheer for a Black candidate? What do we do with those past relationships that disappeared so suddenly and shockingly? So we have kind of a different problem than just than your question about sectarianism. There ain't no ism is closer to it.
So next, we have, I mentioned that Socialist Alternative is a part of the Committee for Workers International, and we have one of our members from our affiliate organization in Germany here, and so we've asked him to prepare some remarks. Let's see, you can stand up. Yeah.
I would like to come to the floor.
Yeah, please do.
You can hear better my sound. Okay, I would like to say welcome to each of you, and it's an honor to speak to you for me. And I would like to promise in advance that I will bring back or tell back the experiences I'm already making here and telling people in Germany about your fight. So when I have heard for the first time, read for the first time of this demand, $15, I thought, oh, wow, it was really impressive for me. And I thought that's correct. That's the correct demand, because I want to tell you what the situation is in Germany. It's different, because in Germany at the present moment in time we have no minimum wage at all. There is no minimum wage. There are people working about those who are worst. They working about €5 per hour. This may be $6, $7. And now the government has decided that there should be a minimum wage with the beginning of the next year, but it's only €8.50. And if you take the real cost of living in the US and in Germany, if you compare, it's less than $10 in reality. And so a lot of workers, low-paid workers, they say, okay, that's good, but to be honest, we can't live on. It's impossible. And the question is, why is this demand, or this what is the reason that the then minimum wage is that low? And the problem is how it was the trade union in Germany. They demanded only €8.50. So it is a very modest demand, and the reason for, and they did not organize a fight for this demand. What they did, they put a big poster placard on the wall of the trade union headquarters in Berlin, and so you can see they are demanding €8.50. But that's in general, that's all. Nothing else, nothing to organize, mobilize on this demand. And the reason for that is, I think maybe it's quite similar in the US. The leader of the biggest union in Germany, he will get every month an income, salary income. It's about €20,000 per month. Yeah. So it's not so urgent, not so pressing for him. And the problem is, at the same time, we have got the Linke, this new party, the left, called Die Linke in Germany. It demands €10, but it's because of this demand of the trade union and the demand of the Linke, that's the reason that we will have a minimum wage next year. But they are, as a trade union, not organizing a real fight for it. And so we will have, most of people would say, okay, it's a little progress, but it will not be enough. And in comparison with that, your demand, the demand you are fighting for, it's really encouraging. And I think at the same time you should remember, I think I can make it short because a lot of people already said that as long as there is capitalism, the capitalists will try to take back whatever we have reached. And so I think the fight for this wage has to be connected with the fight for overthrowing capitalism and with a fight for a real democratic socialist society. And the question came up, is this socialist demand? And it in itself is not socialist, I agree. But I think it depends even on the attitude, or how we argue, because we argue, if the capitalists say we can't afford $15 to pay, we can't afford to pay $15, our answer is we can't afford your system. And then in this sense, it's a socialist demand. And in the looking from Germany in the last 20 or even 30 years, there have been always developments in the US that have come to Germany sooner or later. And it has been, every time this have been bad things, bad development. So at the present moment in time, we have got it all, what you have got. We have got rising inequality, or the system of higher and higher, the rise in the numbers of working poor, of temporary workers, all we have got two, and the last centuries we the working people would have liked to avoid to copy what you have got. But now, in this campaign, it's the other way around. We would like to copy your demand, your fight, and as we have expected, or as we have experienced on the last Thursday, it's a fight which is going on the whole of the world. We have a world of working poor people. And so I would like to end with the last sentence of the Communist Manifesto, where it says, "Workers of the world unite."
So I have Ryan on stack, and I'm going to ask if you'd like to come into the discussion before we hand it back to sum up. Raise his hand while Ryan is speaking.
Just quickly on the issue of left unity and sectarianism, I think that's an important issue, very important issue. But I think if you look at what's going on right now, like that's not going to be solved right away. That's going to take time. But I think the most important thing to draw from this discussion here right now is, yes, there's divisions on the left, but who is actually moving in the struggle at this point in time right now? And it's workers moving in the struggle. That is the most important thing. Like, you have what's going on in Seattle, 15 now. You have a serious situation that's developing where the mayor's proposals on the agenda. But what is going on is the capitalists in Seattle are organizing. They're even going so far and so idiotic that they don't realize they're stepping beyond their bounds of calling for a strike, a one-day strike of business is what's being floated in Seattle right now. Workers have to stand up and fight back. And we're starting to see that. Like, it's beyond Seattle, fast food forward. We had, for the first time that I've seen in a long time, internationally, workers walking off the job, workers actually shutting down fast food places. That's the key thing to draw out, and the left needs to be involved in this. But we have to keep an eye on the main fact that workers are organizing and fighting back, and that is the most important thing right now. And the left needs to be in that to push these ideas of socialism and explaining why we're in the situation we are today. That is the most important thing, and that's our role on the left right now, to be there explaining why capitalists are doing this, why we need to organize to fight back, why we need to organize for socialism. And these workers need to keep pushing forward, and that's the most important thing I feel that people need to draw out of this discussion today. So.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Ryan said. I also want to thank SA for having the German brother here because, you know, we need to hear, I think people need to hear that these struggles are very similar and international. And I think every time we hear somebody who's catching hell on the other side from the same folks, I think it encourages us. I also like the fact that Brother Glenn pointed out that the demand for a higher wage is not a socialist idea itself, and that takes away, you know, their efforts to kind of reiterate the struggle, which, you know, I'm sure they try on occasion, because it's not. Yeah, and fighting inequality is surely not a socialist idea. You know, it's a human idea. You press me all to stand up and push back. And I also want to address the sectarianism thing. And I hear where Brother Calvin's coming from, but I think we have to be careful when we go around talking about it all the time. Sometimes keep talking about the boogeyman, one day he disappears. And so I don't think that the boogeyman really exists here. I think that the sectarian stuff is so small. It's a non-factor. I mean, you know, we're not, you know, in the 60s and 70s when, you know, organizations sprang up with the goal of unending capitalism, and, you know, we had some differences of opinion how we should do it, and we did it negative. That was the issue. But now we're so small. To me, it's not even worth talking about. I mean, I feel you about, you know, maybe you have some internal struggles going on, my brother, that I'm not aware of. But it's just like you at the conference yesterday. Good example. There were people who threw rocks at me, clearly, right? And you see how I mean by rocks. There were provocative things that happened. You saw how I handled it because it wasn't important. I let some people have their say, right? Because we're going in one direction. I was talking about Malcolm X, the need to change society, right? The conference is about a legacy, his legacy. We're going to talk about that. You want to talk about something? Fine. But I move forward. Because what will happen if we keep talking about the sectarian stuff, it becomes all of a sudden an issue. Every time we go to a meeting, then it becomes something we focus on. I think I agree with Ryan. We got to kill that guy. It's not worth it. It's just, it's just not worth the time, energy we spend. And I like Glenn making the point that we help among black folks, we don't really have a left. I mean, that's why Obama got swept into office of people who you thought were radicals, and that's just black folks who are guilty of this. People who I thought were progressive had to turn around and look at them like, really? You know, and they were shouting and waving the banner when Obama was like, don't you know who this guy is? But I'm thankful for it too, because now I know some people were faking the front. They weren't really radical. They definitely were revolutionary. So I was glad for that. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. And thank you for you guys putting this on. And I'm down with the program here, and I can't wait till you all will be at the next meeting, right, everybody? Well, we broaden this thing.
All right, yeah. I just wanted to speak briefly to some of the things I think were raised earlier in the conversation about, you know, why the bosses say they can't pay 15, or maybe they should be paying even more, rather. You know, why are wages suppressed in the first place? You know, with inflation, it should be like 22. I think it's better for productivity. And, you know, I think another common one is, wouldn't it make sense for, you know, the bosses or corporations to increase wages because it's going to stimulate the economy? And I think those are all important questions we have to think about. But I do want to draw that, you know, capitalism, as we probably all know, is not only a crisis, but it's absurd in a lot of ways. So when we think about these questions, we have to think about, like, why do major corporations throw away immense amount of food and clothes because they don't want it to go free? Why do they actively take part in destroying the environment that it needs to survive? You know, why does it outsource jobs for cheaper labor and then destabilize the entire consumer base that it needs to survive in those areas? I mean, we can think of, like, you know, an immense amount of things that are totally absurd. And so when we talk about, like, the $15 an hour thing, in my own mind, I'm not really interested in debating the bosses and corporations on whether they think 15 is available or is on the table. I want to fight and have those discussions and sort of instill confidence in working with people when 15 is available, because I think that if the capitalists And so I think it's been mentioned a number of times now, raising the minimum wage is not going to also stop the raising of the sea levels. But I think we should look at 15 now as a twofold thing, because I think that, yeah, increasing the minimum wage, addressing wealth equality, great. There's also 100 other problems, right? I think that, 15 now is important because it addresses the immediate needs that working people are facing right now. That's poverty and wages. But at the same time, it's the beginning stages of a movement that builds independent political voices for working people, and it builds independent confidence in our own political power and our own structures. So I think that I just wanted to bring that in there, that addressing the minimum wage is important. It has an immediate impact on people's lives, but when we think about 15 now and all the other issues out there, we have to look at it in a larger context of getting working people together with the lessons of not only how to build a struggle, but how to navigate the struggle.
And thanks everybody for providing a really lively discussion. I do want to now hand it back to our panelists, who I believe were talking about the order potentially of doing some sum up thoughts.
The benefit of the microphone. Yeah, I thought it was a great discussion, and obviously will be ongoing. The next weeks, I didn't actually, I think, lay this out in my opening remarks, but it's most likely that the Seattle City Council will vote either at their meeting on the 27th of this month or on the first Tuesday in June. So we're likely to see, national headlines across the country saying 15 is, for real in Seattle in the next few weeks. And I think for Socialist Alternative and the local chapter of 15 Now, and I would encourage everybody else here, we need to be really ready for that. I think we're going to aim to try and have a big 15 Now public meeting to kind of draw some of the lessons out. Maybe it'll be a little repetitive for some of you all here, but I think if you think this is an important struggle, I would encourage you to stay tuned. If you signed in, we'll let you know about it. Invite other people, maybe who haven't been following this as closely, but who will be inspired by the developments. In mid-June, I think we'll have hope to have a really big event to sort of celebrate what's happened in Seattle and get into a more concrete discussion about what the plans are here in Minneapolis the way to fight for 15. There's really exciting developments. The machinists at the airport, the International Association of Machinists, are organizing Delta baggage handlers. And at the airport, there's over 1,000 low-paid workers. And at least the organizing campaign, the active workers at Delta, have agreed they want to take this campaign up as part of their overall organizing drive to fight for 15 at the airport. The airport authority is appointed by the governor and the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul, so those are three kind of pressure points that we can go after in terms of a concrete struggle. It's real hard for them to resist. Delta and the other big airlines are doing quite well. The profitability is way up, and yet they're working their workers harder, faster, under worse conditions than ever before. So that's, I think, an exciting feature, as well as ongoing discussion at the city council level to push Minneapolis to do what Seattle's about to do. I just, the question that sort of came up is the other main thing I wanted to quickly remark on is, I think the question about, the divisions on the left bring up a wider question of how are we going to rebuild a powerful left in this country, a powerful socialist movement. I don't think there's no magic ball or road to that. I think 99% of that is just hard, consistent work, doing, going out, talking to people, doing your weekly tables, going to events, having events like this one that can, in the ones and twos begin to sort of build up the organizational strength. But I do think history shows that usually building powerful socialist movements, building powerful movements of the left, isn't just a purely linear process. There's moments in history where things really take off, where wide sections of working people and oppressed people who, have maybe been looking passively. They're angry, they're against the system, they understand that it's all corrupt and messed up, but they're not confident that things can change. And so they'll give you, we call it in our term, our internal lingo is proxy consciousness. And we experience that to a degree in Seattle, where everybody's like thumbs up to us, good job, Kshama, et cetera. And we say, well, to make this really work, we need to get organized. You need to come to the demonstration. You need to come to your neighborhood assembly. And some do. The majority of our supporters don't. They support us passively. They're with us in the polls. Maybe they came out to vote for us. That's a big deal. But for the most part, they've remained passive. But I think we are at a point in history where we're going to see that beginning to change. Already, as Kelly said, our numbers for our organization, we're just one piece of the puzzle, have doubled, nearly doubled in the last 6 months alone. And I think that's a taste of what will develop in the coming period. If we can win a decisive victory in Seattle and spread the message, that's because of socialist policies, of a class struggle approach, that we won that in Seattle. And we can do that elsewhere if people get organized around these ideas. I think we can begin, it'll take more than just Seattle, but a series of victories where people can say, this isn't just a good idea, but if I get organized, maybe I can see a victory in my community, at my workplace, on the issues I care about. That's where you can begin to see explosive growth. And for that, obviously, on the surface, it would be far superior if all the left could get together and be a unified force that could go out and develop that. But in a genuine sense, I think that, and so, we want that. We support every effort to build maximum unity on the left. That's part of our call for building a broad workers' party, a broad party of the left. Doesn't even have to be a socialist party in our opinion, but if big sections of labor, the Greens, left Greens, other forces came together to form a broad left party, workers' party, we would absolutely be a part of that. We would say we could continue our debates. We won't all agree on everything, but if we could come together on a basic agreement that the two-party system is not serving working people, that we need an explicit program that is pro-worker, fights against racism, sexism, homophobia, for the environment, a very basic platform. I think we could unify wide sections, not just of the existing left, but of new workers and young people and activists who would come into battle. But within that, there would still be debates, because these issues that divide the left right now are not, sometimes they're sort of artificial, exaggerated, that happens, but I basically agree with Mel. I think, mainly that stuff we don't have to pay much attention to. People who, are just, spend half of their time just talking about all the other left groups suck. Well, they don't really have any influence in the class anyway, and I think will be, especially as movements develop, will be, marginalized even further. But amongst forces that really have an influence, that have a weight in working class communities, there are genuine issues and debates and divisions. It's not unique to us, by the way. The ruling class is deeply divided amongst itself about which way to go. As I think I agree with the points Glenn raised, but just as a side point, there are sections of the capitalist class who support even 15. Now, they don't want to do it through struggle. They want to do it for the preservation of their own system whatever. But they think they need to boost the working. So there's divisions in the ruling class about how to fight for their interests, just as there's divisions amongst workers about how to fight for our interests. Those divisions will be will be answered through the events. I think I have confidence in the ideas of our organization, not because I just like to pound our chest and be proud of a group, but because I think it's not a coincidence that our small organization, we're not the largest, we're not the best finance, we don't have the, in some ways, deepest roots or history in this country, but I think our ideas are why we were unique in being as successful as we were in Seattle and to a degree in Minneapolis, because of our methods of struggle. Now, we don't expect everybody to suddenly magically just sign up, but what we do ask is that people look at what we've done, look at what we've written about how we've done it, and try and learn from that. We have things to learn from other groups who've done successes elsewhere. But I think through the process of testing ideas and methods and practice, that's the road to the maximum unity, through people, an honest debate and dialogue on the left of how do we best fight this system that we commonly recognize is at the root of the problems. And I think through the course of experience, I think the best ideas, the most effective methods of struggle will tend to win out and attract the widest sections of the best activists in the years ahead. So that's what we're hoping we can be a part of, but we think it'll be a much wider process than just our own organization. And we're fighting to build that kind of unity and practice and struggle wherever we can. Thanks.
Bueno, para concluir y agregar unos puntos Los trabajadores no se quedarán callados, continuarán con la lucha y nosotros, los socialistas, estaremos con ellos, apoyando.
Oh, sorry. To conclude, workers aren't going to wait around and remain quiet and say nothing. They're going to keep fighting, and ourselves as socialists, we're going to have to support their struggle as best we can.
Por un salario justo, o sea, vamos a seguir trabajando por un salario justo. Y es el inicio para otros movimientos que continúan afectando a los trabajadores.
So, for a just salary, for a living wage, we think that movement can also be the beginning of other movements of workers to better their conditions and their security as well.
Y bueno, yo pienso que sí se puede y se puede, pero ¿cómo lo hacemos? So how do we do it? By hablando con la comadrita, hablando con el amigo, hablando con el vecino, talking to your the godfather, talking to your friend, talking to your neighbor. That's how we participate. Thank you, everybody.
I'll be brief because I have very little to say in summation, but I wanted to add some things. I think this groundswell that surprised the organizers themselves, that surprised the fast food workers when they first promulgated this really rather arbitrary number, 15, why 15? Didn't matter. 15 means a lot like 40 means in an ancient language. 40 means a lot. That's why everything in the Bible occurs for 40 days and 40 nights or 40 something. It really translates as a lot. And 15 means a lot more, a lot bigger wage than we get. And so we see this groundswell of positive response to an arbitrary number that people understand means these people are going to have to pay you a whole lot more than you're getting. I think that there's a relationship between that and the public embracing this slogan of 1%, also an arbitrary number, but it works. And the public embraced it. They have an idea of a worthless, rich group of people at the top who they despise. And so we're hungry to embrace a slogan that embodies that. So people are hungry to embrace movements, ideas that challenge the rich. They're hungry to do that. This shows us that despite the fact that Americans are supposed to be so apathetic and don't give a damn, that they really do respond if to certain things that are basic and understandable. And that really is quite heartening to me because I think that everybody hates the banks even more than just that hate the 1%, which is nobody in particular. Everybody hates banks. And I believe that if folks did with what Occupy walked up to the edge of doing and said, crush the banks, not break them up, crush them, which is revolution, that people would respond in surprising numbers. And so this the response to 15 as well as the response to the 1% shows us that we ain't been doing something right in the past, but we can do something right, that it's not the people's fault, we just have not struck the chord. Thanks.
if you want, or just hang out and talk.
One quick announcement.
Yeah.
We have a computer that if you have a credit card and weren't able to throw money in the bucket but do want to donate, you can talk to Sam and you can take a donation. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Another announcement. At 5 o'clock in